Welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be cracking open a pretty massive report.
Oh, yeah.
520 pages.
Wow.
It's a congressional report titled 12.04.2024 SSCP Final Report.pdf.
Okay.
And it's basically a deep dive into the U.S. pandemic response.
All right.
We're going to be talking about everything.
Oh, wow.
From the origins of the virus to masks and lockdowns,
Okay.
vaccines, economic fallout, all that.
The whole 9 yards?
Yeah, the whole thing.
All right.
So this isn't just like a summary of events.
Right.
This is an actual congressional investigation, which
Mhm.
means
Yeah.
it's looking at the controversies,
Mhm.
the conflicting viewpoints,
Yeah.
really trying to get down to like the tough questions about how things were handled.
Sounds like it.
So consider this your shortcut
Okay.
to understanding all the key takeaways and controversies
Yeah.
without having to read all 520 pages yourself.
I like it.
So one of the things that we found super interesting right off the bat
Yeah.
was
What's that?
the stuff about the origins of the virus.
Okay.
And this is something that I know you followed pretty closely.
I did. Yeah.
You know, remember that scientific paper, Proximal Origin?
Oh, yeah.
The one that everyone cited as like the reason to dismiss the lab leak theory?
The one that, like, basically shut down the conversation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what's crazy is this report reveals that Dr. Fauci himself
What?
actually prompted that paper
No way.
to try and disprove the lab leak theory.
Oh, wow.
Pretty ironic, right?
That's wild.
Like you're trying to shut down the idea of a lab leak
Yeah.
by writing a paper disproving the lab leak.
Right.
And that's the paper that everyone uses to say it wasn't a lab leak.
It does raise some questions about the scientific process there, for sure.
Yeah, and you know,
Yeah.
the report also highlights that the Defense Intelligence Agency,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
DIA,
Okay.
they actually criticized Proximal Origin
Mm-hmm.
in their own analysis. They pointed out all these weaknesses in the paper's arguments
Uh-huh.
and said that even the authors of Proximal Origin admitted that a lab origin was possible.
So they're like, even the authors were like, well, it's possible.
Yeah, like it's not impossible,
Right.
but we're just going to say it wasn't.
Interesting.
So hold on. So the DIA,
Yeah.
a major intelligence agency,
Yeah.
is raising red flags about this paper
Yeah.
that's being used to shut down the lab leak theory.
It definitely seems like there was this attempt to control the narrative
Mm-hmm.
and suppress alternative viewpoints, even if they were backed by evidence.
And that's something that you see throughout the report.
It's like a theme.
Yeah, it keeps coming up over and over again.
Yeah.
So how does EcoHealth Alliance fit in all this?
Okay.
Because I know they were mentioned a lot,
They were everywhere.
but I'm still not clear on like exactly what they were doing.
Well, so EcoHealth Alliance was doing bat coronavirus research
Okay.
at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and their work is a big part of this whole debate about where the virus came from.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Their funding proposal
Yeah.
was actually rejected
By who?
by DARPA,
DARPA.
the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency,
And why was it rejected?
because they said it lacked gain of function or DURC plans.
Okay.
Hold on, I know that's a lot of jargon.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm a little lost.
So DURC plans are basically safety protocols
Okay.
for when you're working with really dangerous pathogens.
Oh, so like,
They're supposed to minimize the risk of accidentally releasing the virus
God.
while misusing it.
So they're saying this research is too risky
Right.
without these extra safety measures in place.
Exactly.
But Dr. Daszak, the head of EcoHealth Alliance,
Yeah.
he claims that they did have DURC plans,
Hmm.
even though the report says they didn't.
So we have conflicting accounts here.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder who's telling the truth.
And what else might be hidden?
Right. Transparency is key. And to make it even more complicated,
Yeah.
the report details how the Trump administration actually terminated the EcoHealth grant,
Oh, wow.
but then
Hard.
the NIH under the Biden administration reinstated it.
So it was cut off and then brought back.
Exactly.
I mean, that seems like a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal.
And the report is saying, we don't know why.
Right.
Like, why was it cut off in the first place?
Yeah.
And why was it brought back?
Exactly. There's a lack of clarity around this whole decision.
So it sounds like this whole origins debate
Yeah,
is far from settled.
it really is.
And there are a lot of unanswered questions
Absolutely.
about transparency
Yes.
and potential conflicts of interest.
Definitely. It seems like there was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
And maybe some things that weren't handled in the most transparent way.
And this potential for bias in scientific discourse.
Yeah.
isn't just limited to the origins debate.
Right.
The report highlights similar concerns when examining other pandemic policies, like masking and lockdowns.
Okay, interesting.
So they found that Cochrane Collaboration,
Yeah.
which is a very well-respected source
Yeah, I've heard of them.
for evidence-based healthcare,
They're reliable?
they found that there's no clear evidence that masks actually reduce respiratory viral infections.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So all those mask mandates
Yeah.
might not have actually been based on solid science.
That's what the report's saying.
I mean, I remember all that debate about whether the CDC was following the science on masking.
Right.
And the report says that when they questioned Dr. Fauci about it,
Yeah.
he couldn't cite any placebo-controlled studies to support those mandates.
It seems like a pattern,
What do you mean?
like promoting certain narratives
Yeah.
without necessarily having the evidence to back them up.
You're picking up on a key theme here.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that maybe things weren't as clear-cut as they were presented,
Right.
and that maybe some voices were silenced or ignored.
And this brings us to the potential harms of these policies.
Okay.
So the report goes into the possible downsides of masking young children, especially when it comes to language development.
Oh, right.
They found studies that showed these concerns,
Uh-huh.
but it seems like they were largely ignored.
So they're saying maybe we didn't fully consider all the risks and benefits.
Yeah, like were the downsides,
Yeah.
especially for vulnerable populations like children,
Right.
overlooked.
It's a good question.
And the same concern
Yeah.
about unintended consequences
Mm-hmm.
applies to lockdowns as well.
Of course.
The report doesn't hold back,
Okay.
describing the economic and mental health impacts
Yeah.
of those
Well,
measures.
Right. I remember that being a big topic of discussion.
Yeah.
The whole economic and mental health struggles during lockdown.
So what did they actually find?
Well, they cited a study
Yeah.
published in Nature,
Okay.
which is a top scientific journal,
Yeah.
and they found a 22% increase in
Wow.
mental health disorders
That's huge.
between 2019 and 2020.
That is a massive jump.
It is.
And it really shows the cost of lockdowns.
Yeah, the social and psychological costs.
And you wonder if anyone thought about
Yeah.
those long-term consequences.
Right, like did anyone stop and say, hey, what about the mental health effects of all this?
Yeah, exactly.
It's important to consider the whole picture.
And the report also highlights the issue of excess deaths
Oh, wow.
from causes other than COVID-19,
Okay.
particularly among younger Americans.
So like collateral damage from the pandemic response.
And they're saying that these collateral damages
Yeah.
were largely overlooked
Wow.
because everyone was focused on the virus itself.
It's like they had blinders on,
Yeah.
focused on one thing and ignoring everything else.
So it seems like the single-minded focus on the virus
Mm-hmm.
might have led to some neglect
Yeah.
of other important health issues
Right.
and unintended consequences.
Exactly.
And if we connect that back to what we talked about with the origins debate,
Yeah. It seems like there's a broader pattern here
what is it?
of emphasizing a single narrative
Uh-huh.
while downplaying or ignoring
Yeah.
alternative viewpoints
Okay.
and potential harm.
Like they were so focused on one path
Yeah.
that they didn't even consider other possibilities.
What could go wrong?
Right. And that can be really dangerous. It
Yeah.
makes you think like, were we really prepared for something like this?
Yeah.
Did we have the right systems in place?
Right?
Were our decisions based on like, a full understanding of the risks and benefits?
I mean, this report kind of suggests that maybe we weren't.
Yeah, it seems like there were some gaps
Yeah.
in our preparedness and in our decision making.
And speaking of potentially flawed responses,
Okay.
the report really digs into the government's handling of vaccines,
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
which was, of course, a major focal point throughout the pandemic.
Absolutely.
And it's important to clarify here,
Yeah.
we're not debating the science of vaccines themselves.
Right.
We're looking at the decisions.
Surrounding their rollout
Okay.
and the potential missteps
Got it.
along the way.
So, like, how things were handled,
Yeah, exactly.
not necessarily the vaccines themselves.
Right.
They-
So one of the most surprising findings
Yeah.
was that President Biden
Okay.
was publicly promising booster shots for all Americans
Really?
before the FDA
Wow.
or the CDC
Okay.
had even issued official recommendations.
So he was getting ahead of the science.
It seems like the political considerations
Yeah.
might have outpaced the scientific process in that case.
Interesting.
And it makes you wonder
Yeah.
if the focus was really on public health.
Right. Like, was it more about politics than science?
Exactly.
Mm.
And then the report goes on to talk about
Okay.
these two FDA scientists,
Okay.
Drs. Gruber and Krauss,
All right.
who raised concerns
About what?
about the accelerated booster approval process. They were basically saying that the data didn't support boosters for everyone, and they were basically sidelined
Wow.
for voicing their dissenting opinions.
So they got punished for speaking up?
It seems that way.
That's concerning.
Yeah, it really makes you think about
Yeah.
what was going on inside the FDA.
Right. Like, how was dissent handled?
Yeah, was there pressure to conform,
To a certain narrative?
even if the evidence wasn't really there?
Exactly. It makes you question the whole process.
The report also criticizes Dr. Woodcock,
Okay.
who was the head of the FDA at the time,
Right.
for claiming she couldn't recall any discussions about vaccine mandates, even though there's documented evidence to the contrary.
So she's saying she doesn't remember,
Yeah, basically.
but there's proof that these discussions happened.
Yeah, emails, meeting minutes, things like that.
Wow, that's a pretty big discrepancy.
It is, and it really undermines trust
In the FDA.
in the whole system.
Yeah, if they're not being transparent,
Right.
how can we trust their decisions?
And speaking of questionable decisions, the report also looks at the FDA's handling of ivermectin.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Remember that whole campaign to discourage its use?
Right, they were saying it was only for animals.
Yeah, that infamous tweet.
You are not a horse. You are not a cow.
Come on!
Yeah, it was pretty condescending.
And the report is saying that was misleading.
Okay.
Because ivermectin does have approved human uses.
Right, it's not just for livestock.
So they're criticizing the FDA for dismissing a potential treatment without thoroughly investigating it.
It seems like they were quick to shut down any alternatives that didn't fit their narrative.
And this tendency to favor a single narrative seems to have extended to vaccine mandates as well.
Interesting.
The report argues that the mandates ignored national immunity.
Okay.
And that there wasn't really clear evidence that vaccines actually prevented transmission.
Which was their main justification for the mandates.
Exactly.
So they're saying the mandates might have gone too far.
You know, maybe they infringed on individual rights.
And that doctor-patient relationship.
Right. Shouldn't those decisions be made between a patient and their doctor?
Yeah. That's what the report is arguing.
It's a tough balance, though.
What do you mean?
Balancing individual liberties with public health.
Right.
It's not an easy question to answer.
And to show the human cost
Of the mandates.
Yeah. The report shares the story of Allison Williams.
Who was that?
She's a pregnant woman
who
lost her job for refusing the vaccine.
Oh, wow.
And it really reminds you that behind all these policy debates are real people whose lives were affected.
It's easy to forget that sometimes.
Yeah, we get caught up in the big picture.
Yeah.
But these are real people with real stories.
Absolutely.
The report also delves into the issue of vaccine injuries.
Okay.
Which are rare.
Right.
But they do happen.
Yeah.
And it seems like the system for compensating people for vaccine injuries was totally overwhelmed.
So the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program had a massive backlog of cases.
Wow. So people who were injured were having trouble getting compensated.
And what's even more concerning is that Dr. Woodcock herself admitted that there were uncommon but serious reactions
to the vaccines that weren't officially recognized.
Exactly.
So they knew there were more side effects.
Yeah, but they weren't necessarily tracking them.
Or acknowledging them.
Right, and the report is saying that those existing safety systems might have been missing some important signals.
Okay.
Especially when it came to neurological conditions.
So there could be more problems.
Yeah, potentially.
Than we realize.
And this raises questions about whether we're doing enough to monitor vaccine safety.
Especially with new vaccines.
Especially when they're rolled out so quickly.
Right, like under emergency use authorization.
Exactly.
It seems like there are a lot of unanswered questions here.
Yeah, and this really gets to a broader theme that the report identifies.
What's that?
Government overreach.
Oh, interesting.
And its impact on the doctor-patient relationship.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So the report is basically saying that these healthcare decisions, especially something as personal as vaccination, should be made between individuals and their doctors.
Yeah.
Not dictated by the government.
I can see both sides of that argument.
And they used Chairman Wenstrup's experience as an example.
Okay, what happened?
So he couldn't get a COVID test.
Really?
Even though his doctor recommended it.
Why not?
Because he wasn't showing symptoms.
So the government policy was preventing him from getting a test.
Even though his doctor thought he needed one.
That's a good example of a one-size-fits-all policy.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for everyone.
And the report also presents the testimony of Dr. Jerry Williams,
Okay.
who's a child neurologist.
Right.
And he talked about the difficulties he faced in getting off-label drugs. Like hydroxychloroquine.
Okay.
For his patients.
And why was that a problem?
He said there was government pressure on pharmacies. That made it really hard.
To get these medications.
Even when he thought they were in his patient's best interest.
So the government was interfering with his ability to treat his patients.
Exactly.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. And it raises concerns about how much power the government should have.
In these situations.
In healthcare decisions.
It's a slippery slope.
So let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about the economic fallout.
From the pandemic response.
Yeah. This is a huge issue.
Absolutely. It's going to have long-term consequences.
And the report doesn't shy away from it.
Okay.
They look at how the response, particularly the lockdowns and business closures, really hurt.
In certain communities?
Yeah, rural and low-income communities.
Okay.
So these communities were already facing economic challenges before the pandemic even hit. And then the lockdowns and job losses just made things so much worse.
It's like the pandemic response.
Yeah.
Exposed all these pre-existing problems in our society.
And magnified them.
Right.
The economic disparities, healthcare inequities, educational gaps.
It's like it exacerbated everything.
Yeah. And then there's the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
The report argues that their actions, while they were intended to help, actually fueled inflation and ended up benefiting the wealthy at the expense of lower income earners.
So the rich got richer.
And the poor got poorer.
Yeah, essentially.
So the report gets into this whole argument.
Okay.
That the Fed's policies, like pumping all this money into the economy, led to rising prices.
And inflation hurts everyone.
But it hurts low-income earners the most.
Because they have less cushion to absorb those price increases.
It's like these policies had these unintended consequences.
Right, they were trying to help, but they might have actually made things worse for some people.
To make matters even worse, the report also looks at the Paycheck Protection Program.
Okay.
And the Employee Retention Credit.
Those were the big relief programs.
Right. And they found significant levels of waste, fraud, and abuse.
Oh, wow.
Associated with those programs.
So even the programs designed to help were riddled with problems.
It seems like a pattern of good intentions gone wrong.
Yeah, like they were trying to do the right thing. But things just didn't go as planned.
And speaking of patterns,
there's
one more major issue that this report brings up.
What's that?
A lack of transparency.
Oh, wow.
Throughout the entire pandemic response.
Transparency is so important.
It is.
Especially in a crisis.
Because without it, trust erodes.
Right.
And this report is very critical.
Of who?
Of the Department of Health and Human Services.
HHS?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're saying that HHS was not cooperative and that they deliberately obfuscated evidence.
So they were hiding information.
It seems like it.
That's not good.
One example that really stood out to me was the fact that HHS redacted more information in the documents they provided to Congress than they did to a FOIA requester.
Hold on. What's a FOIA requester?
So FOIA stands for the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay.
It's a law
that
lets anyone request access to government documents.
Got it.
So a FOIA requester is just someone who filed a request under that act.
Okay, so anyone can file a FOIA request.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So HHS was more transparent with a random person than they were with Congress.
That's bizarre.
It is.
And it suggests they were trying to hide something.
Yeah, like why wouldn't they just be transparent?
Right, what are they so afraid of?
And the report also details attempts to restrict the testimony of Dr. Morenz.
Who's that?
A senior NIH official.
Okay.
And they found out that he was using personal email
to
avoid FOIA requests.
So he was trying to circumvent the system.
That's what it looks like.
Wow, that's pretty shady.
It is.
Yeah.
And the report concludes this section by calling for greater accountability and transparency.
From HHS.
Yes, specifically from HHS.
It seems like they were really not happy with HHS.
No, they were not.
And they're basically saying that the public has a right to know how these decisions were made.
What information was considered.
And how taxpayer money was spent.
It's a pretty powerful statement.
It is.
It's like they're saying we deserve better.
Yeah, we deserve transparency and accountability.
From our government.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear from this report that there are some serious concerns about how the pandemic was handled.
Definitely.
And one of the things that I keep thinking about is the long-term consequences.
Oh, all this.
Yeah, like what does this mean for the future?
Right, because it's not just about what happened.
Exactly.
It's about what happens next.
And one of the biggest concerns for me is the erosion of trust.
In our institutions.
Yeah, like if people feel like they weren't given accurate information or that their concerns were dismissed, it's going to be really hard to regain that trust.
Especially during the next crisis.
Exactly like what happens when the next pandemic hits.
Yeah, are people going to listen to the experts?
Are they going to trust the government?
Right, because if they don't, that could be a real problem.
Absolutely, it could make the situation even worse.
So how do we even begin to rebuild that trust?
That's the million-dollar question.
Does this report offer any solutions?
I mean, it doesn't give us all the answers, but it does highlight the need for a more open and honest discussion.
About what went wrong.
Yeah, like we need to acknowledge the mistakes.
And learn from them.
So what are some of the key areas that we need to address?
Well, it seems like there are a lot of intertwined issues here.
There are.
But one thing that really stands out to me is the role of government.
In public health emergencies.
Like how much power should the government have?
Right. Should they be able to mandate medical treatments?
That's a tough one.
It is.
Because you have to balance individual liberties.
With public health.
And there's no easy answer.
No, it's a complex issue.
And then there's the whole issue of science being politicized.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
This report shows how easily science can be manipulated.
To fit a narrative.
And how dissenting voices can be silenced.
We need to encourage open debate.
Yeah, and critical thinking.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even when it challenges the status quo.
Exactly. Science is about questioning and exploring.
Not blindly accepting.
And that brings us back to transparency.
We need to hold our leaders accountable.
Absolutely.
And demand clear explanations for their decisions.
Transparency is the foundation of trust.
And without trust, we're lost.
We can't function as a society.
Well, this has been a pretty intense deep dive.
It has.
This report was packed with shocking details.
Yeah. It was a real eye-opener.
And it raises so many questions.
About how the pandemic was handled.
And what we need to do differently in the future.
It definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It does.
And I hope it motivates people to get involved.
To ask questions.
To demand better.
From our leaders.
And from ourselves.
Because we all have a role to play.
In shaping a better future.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive
into the complexities and controversies
of the pandemic response.
We hope you learned something.
And that you'll continue to explore these issues.
Stay curious, stay informed.
And keep asking those tough questions.